Picture this, right? It's the late 1920s.
Okay.
We are in a condemned cell in Lahore.
Right. Deep inside a British colonial prison.
Exactly. And there's a 23-year-old revolutionary sitting there, and he is facing the gallows.
Just, waiting for the end.
Yeah. Imminent death is literally just around the corner. But the thing is, he isn't praying.
Which is what you'd expect, right?
Totally. He isn't asking for forgiveness. He's not seeking, spiritual comfort from a priest or a holy book or anything like that.
Right.
Instead, he is furiously writing a philosophical treatise.
Just incredible.
I know, right? And this treatise, it completely challenges the very existence of God, and it outlines this highly detailed vision for a just secular society.
It's just a striking image, primarily because it completely subverts the historical and, the cultural expectations of someone in their final days.
Yeah, exactly.
Generally, we expect, quiet reflection or maybe fear or just a desperate grasp at the divine.
Yeah, grasping for some kind of safety net.
Yeah. Right. But here, the sources present this meticulously argued, fiercely intellectual defense of atheism and socialism.
Yeah.
Written by a man who was literally waiting for the executioner.
And that 23-year-old is the legendary Indian revolutionary Bhagat Singh.
Yeah.
So today, we're taking a deep dive into his mind. And we're going to be using a couple of foundational sources for this.
Right.
We are looking at this really comprehensive biography of Singh by M.M. Juneja, and we're pairing that with Singh's own iconic and highly provocative essay, Why I Am an Atheist.
Which is a text that has, it's acquired this monumental status in the history of the Indian revolutionary movement.
Oh, absolutely.
It really serves as a primary document for understanding the intellectual underpinnings of the whole anti-colonial struggle.
So here's our mission for you on this deep dive today. We are going to map out Bhagat Singh's primary reasoning.
Right, step by step.
Exactly. We want to evaluate his claims not just as historical artifacts, but we really want to put them to the test using the rigorous standards of a university philosophy class.
Yeah, we're really going to dissect the logic.
Right. We will compare his arguments with common theological counterarguments, trace his personal moral growth from, a romantic rebel with a pistol to a profoundly deep secular thinker.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to clarify all these concepts for anyone out there trying to understand the intersection of revolution and philosophy.
But, before we really begin unpacking this material, we do need to establish the parameters of this deep dive.
Good call. Yeah, set the ground rules.
Because the sources we're examining today, they contain some intensely held, highly uncompromising views.
Very intense.
We are dealing with militant anti-imperialism, staunch Marxism, and just unapologetic atheism.
Right.
Bhagat Singh, he pulls absolutely no punches in his critique of religion, theology, and the state.
None at all.
So our goal here today is not to endorse these views.
Right.
Nor are we taking a side in the political or religious debates that he sparks. We are not here to tell you what to believe about God or society.
Exactly. You can make up your own mind.
Our job is just to act as, neutral philosophical excavators. We're going to objectively unpack the logic, understand the historical context, and just see exactly how Singh constructed his arguments.
So let's start with the context of his transformation, right? Because to really grasp his philosophical arguments, we first have to understand why a man who was globally known for action,
And specifically for violence, yeah.
right, why he pivoted so hard toward heavy intellectual study. Because history often, it flattens people,
It really does.
We turn complex human beings into these two-dimensional action figures. And with Bhagat Singh, the myth often reduces him to this, Superman with a pistol and a fedora.
Right, just throwing bombs and fighting the empire single-handedly.
Exactly. But the sources point out that this flattening was almost a deliberate phenomenon over the decades.
Oh, absolutely. When you put a historical figure on a pedestal that high, where they are ritually honored, their actual complex ideas often just become obscure.
Yeah, they get lost.
Or they're deemed, impossible for ordinary people to follow.
Right.
But Juneja's biography brings his self-perception into this really sharp focus. Singh explicitly wrote about himself, quote, "I'm an ordinary human being, that is all."
Wow. Yeah, so he actively rejected that mythological Superman narrative.
Totally rejected it.
And his relationship with violence also seems to be fundamentally misunderstood in the popular imagination.
Yeah, it really is.
Because the biography notes that he considered his violent activities to be meant only for, quote, surgical bloodshed.
And that phrase, surgical bloodshed, that's a really critical phrase for us to analyze here.
Right, because surgical implies what?
Well, it implies precision, necessity and a broader intent to, like, excise disease,
Ah,
which, in his view, the disease was British imperialism
right.
rather than just, participating in violence for the sake of violence.
Yeah, it wasn't chaotic.
Right. But this nuanced view of action, it didn't just manifest instantly. It was the product of this massive evolution.
Okay, so take us through that. Like, if we look at his life prior to 1925, how does he describe himself?
Well, Singh himself categorizes his earlier iteration as a romantic revolutionary.
A romantic revolutionary. I mean, I'm curious about what that actually looked like on the ground.
Yeah.
Because romantic revolutionary sounds poetic, sure, but in the context of the Hindustan Republican Association and the HRA in 1920s India, what did that phase actually entail?
Functionally, it meant they operated on just a massive surplus of passion,
Okay.
an incredible willingness to sacrifice, and this deep-seated hatred for British colonial rule.
Right.
And here's the catch and deficit of long-term strategic vision.
Ah, right. All heart, no plan.
Exactly. So by 1925, Singh hits this profound ideological crisis.
Okay.
He begins to realize that the older leadership of the HRA, they were leaning super heavily on mysticism, blind faith, and just emotional fervor to keep the momentum going.
Like running on fumes.
Yeah. They knew precisely what they wanted to destroy, but they had very little idea of what they were actually trying to build in its place.
That's a huge problem.
And the movement began hitting a wall. The sources describe, like, comrades starting to jeer at each other.
Wow, really?
Yeah, there was this creeping existential fear that the whole enterprise was just utterly futile.
You know, I look at that situation and it reminds me of a modern tech startup.
No, how so?
Like, imagine a startup that has created an incredibly disruptive product, right? They can absolutely wreck the existing legacy market.
Right, they could tear it all down.
Exactly. But then when you actually sit the founders down and ask, okay, what's your actual business model? How does this run sustainably 10 years from now once you've disrupted everything?
Right.
And they just stare at you blankly.
Yeah, they have no idea.
Like, you can't just tear down the British Empire. You absolutely have to know what kind of structural, economic, and social system you are going to build in the vacuum that you create.
That's a perfect analogy. And taking your startup analogy a step further, Singh basically realized the HRA's burn rate was being paid in human lives.
Oh, wow.
Without an ideological business model, they were going to bankrupt the movement, meaning dead revolutionaries and zero structural change.
Just a total tragedy.
Right. And he realized that a successful revolution could easily just end up replacing white exploiters with brown exploiters.
Right, if the underlying system remains totally intact.
Exactly. So to face the jeers of his opponents, and honestly, more importantly, to insulate himself against his own internal doubts, he realized he had to arm himself with arguments.
He needed theory.
Right. Study became his primary weapon.
And the extent of his studying, according to the sources, is just staggering. He went on an absolute intellectual binge.
He really did.
The sources talk about this 404-page jail notebook that he kept.
Yeah.
Like, he is sitting in a colonial prison and he's just devouring everything he can source. Marx, Lenin, Trotsky, Bakunin, Darwin. And he wasn't just, like, skimming to pass the time. He was taking meticulous notes, organizing extracts, essentially building a manual for future reference.
Yeah, and for any undergraduate political science or philosophy listeners out there, what we are witnessing here is the classic, crucial shift from praxis.
Which is action, right?
Right, action lacking theory.
Mm.
Shifting from that to action that is deeply informed by critical theory.
This is so important.
He recognized that momentum without philosophy is blind. And this period of study, it fundamentally changed the trajectory of his movement.
How so? Like, practically?
Well, he successfully convinced his party to literally change their name. They added the word socialist to become the Hindustan Socialist Republican Association, the HSRA.
Which completely redefines the parameters of their fight.
Totally.
Like, the mission statement shifts from a nationalist Brits out to a systemic Brits out, and let's restructure the entire economic reality of the nation.
Exactly. He made it a formal stance that a republic without socialism was unacceptable.
Wow.
Even as, like, a transitional measure, he wouldn't accept it. The intellectual labor in that jail cell provided the theoretical scaffolding for the entire movement.
Okay, so this brings us to a major conflict in his life. Because as he builds this massive intellectual profile, he also gains widespread fame.
Right.
The Delhi Assembly bombing in 1929 and the subsequent Lahore conspiracy case, they put the eyes of the entire subcontinent squarely on him.
He gives a household name.
Yeah. And as his public profile grows, his vocal atheism also becomes public knowledge.
Right.
And a very specific criticism arises from his religious peers. They start claiming that all this fame has gone to his head,
Yeah.
and that his atheism is really just a byproduct of a newly inflated ego.
Right, and the arrogant atheist is a frequent historical trope.
Oh, for sure.
The accusation leveled against him was that he had become vain, that he felt he was too prominent, too famous to need higher power anymore.
Like he outgrew God.
Exactly. And the sources highlight this highly poignant encounter that illustrates this perfectly. It involves Bhagat Singh.
Okay, and this encounter, this happens in October 1930, right? Inside the Lahore Central Jail.
That's the one.
And this encounter basically sets the foundation for Singh's entire essay.
It does. So Bhagat Singh was a deeply religious man,
Right.
a respected patriot himself, and a fellow prisoner. And he discovers that Bhagat Singh is a non-believer, and he manages to gain access to his condemned cell.
Okay.
And he basically attempts to convince Singh about the existence of God.
Kind of like a final intervention.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But when his theological arguments fail to sway the young revolutionary, Bhagat Singh grows super frustrated.
Naturally.
And he resorts to a personal attack. He tells Singh, quote, "You are giddy with fame and have developed an ego which is standing like a black curtain between you and God."
A black curtain of ego. I mean, that is an incredibly heavy accusation to throw at a man who is literally waiting to be hanged for his country.
It's intense.
I would expect Singh to react defensively to that, or maybe just be dismissive. But instead he writes, "Why I am an atheist, largely as a methodical, structural dismantling of this exact charge."
Right. And this is where his rigorous philosophical training from those jail studies really becomes evident.
Yeah.
Because he utilizes a classic analytical move here. Before engaging in a debate, what's the first rule?
You have to define the terms of the argument.
Exactly. You must define your terms. So he methodically dissects the accusation of vanity. He proposes that we look at what vanity or pride actually means in a theological framework.
And his logic here is really fascinating, because he argues that if a person's lack of belief is genuinely rooted in vanity, there are really only two logical avenues that that person can take.
Right.
Either that man thinks he possesses godly qualities himself, or he takes it a step further and declares that he actually is God.
Right. And Singh points out a critical flaw in Bhagat Singh's accusation based on those two exact avenues.
Which is,
well, in both of those hypothetical scenarios, whether a man thinks he has divine qualities or he thinks he literally is a deity, that person is not actually an atheist.
right.
They are actively affirming the existence of supernatural power and a divine hierarchy.
Yeah.
They just happen to mistakenly believe that they occupy the top position.
That is such a good point.
But an atheist, according to Singh's strict definition, completely rejects the concept of an omnipresent, all-powerful God entirely.
Right. The position doesn't even exist to them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Therefore, true atheism cannot logically stem from the kind of vanity that seeks to compete with or emulate a deity.
He's basically arguing that it's fundamentally a category error.
Yes.
And to further prove that his atheism wasn't just some sudden fame-induced rush to the head, he maps out his personal moral growth in the essay.
He does.
Because if you look at his background, he was absolutely not raised in a secular or skeptical environment.
Not at all. His upbringing was deeply steeped in religious practice. He was raised under the strict guidance of his father, who was a staunch Arya Samaji.
Which is a prominent Hindu reform movement.
Right, exactly. And Singh writes that as a young student, he would sit for hours just reciting religious mantras.
Wow.
Furthermore, he grew up with a strong Sikh identity, growing his hair long the kais in accordance with Sikh religious custom.
Okay.
And he states quite plainly in the essay that his belief in God during those formative years was, quote, firm and strong.
So I am trying to square that deep religious conditioning with his eventual stance.
Oh.
Because it makes his turn to atheism look less like, a youthful rebellion against his parents.
Yeah.
And more like a massive intellectual rupture, especially because he was rebelling against the mainstream culture of his own revolutionary mentors.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, the sources mention leaders like Secundranath Sanyal, the author of Bandi Jivan.
Right.
And Sanyal was a massive figure in the movement, but he was a staunch believer who filled all his writings with praises to God.
Yeah, and Singh also points to the famous Kakori martyrs, Ramprasad Bismil, Rajendra Lahiri, and others.
What?
He notes that all of them passed their final days in prison, deeply engaged in prayer. They were reciting hymns from the Upanishads and the Gita.
Okay.
So the foundational culture of the Revolutionary Party before Singh's era was heavily, heavily reliant on divine sanction.
So breaking from that tradition, I mean, that carries an immense social cost.
Exactly the point Singh is making. When he embraced atheism, he wasn't doing it to fit in with his peers.
Right.
And he certainly wasn't doing it because it made him popular among the masses that he was trying to inspire.
Yeah, it probably alienated a lot of people.
It did.
Yeah.
He did it in direct, uncomfortable defiance of the prevailing revolutionary culture, simply because his rigorous study of materialist philosophy demanded it.
Okay, so having defined his terms and having defended his character against that specific charge of vanity, Singh then goes on the offensive.
He really does.
He pivots from this defensive posture to actively attacking the concept of a benevolent creator. And to do this, he deploys an argument that philosophy professors and theologians have debated for centuries, right? The problem of evil.
Yes, and for listeners who might be religious skeptics or maybe undergraduate philosophy students listening in, Singh's argument here is a direct application of the Epicurean paradox.
Okay, break that down for us.
So the paradox, which is attributed to the ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus, it asks a foundational question about the nature of a deity.
All right.
It posits, if God is almighty, omnipresent, and omniscient, meaning he possesses the power to do anything, exists everywhere, and knows absolutely everything past, present, and future.
Right.
And if this God is also infinitely good and benevolent, then why did he create a world that is completely saturated with what Singh terms woe and grief?
And Singh, he really doesn't hold back in his application of this paradox.
No, he goes hard.
He brings in some incredibly provocative historical analogies to kind of force the reader to evaluate this hypothetical almighty God.
Yeah.
Like, he compares the creator to some of the most notorious tyrants in human history. He specifically cites Nero, the Roman emperor who supposedly burned Rome for his own morbid enjoyment, and Genghis Khan, who slaughtered thousands upon thousands.
Yeah, and the rhetorical device he uses here is a scale of cruelty.
Okay.
He argues that, okay, Nero only killed a limited number of people, and Genghis Khan, for all his historical brutality, killed thousands.
Right.
But then Singh asks, how can a theologian justify an all-powerful God who every single day, every single moment, presides over a world where the daily infliction of misery, disease, and poverty vastly surpasses Genghis Khan in sheer scale and cruelty?
Wow, that is a heavy comparison.
It is. Singh's argument is that if the world is a living hell for the majority of its inhabitants, and God possesses the infinite power to instantly change it but chooses not to, then God is infinitely more cruel than the worst human tyrants.
But wait, anyone who has spent any time in a theology class or just debated religion knows the standard counter-arguments that are immediately deployed here.
Right, of course.
The defense usually relies on two main pillars. Either it is simply God's law and human minds cannot comprehend it, or the free will defense.
Yeah, the classic defenses.
Right, which suggests God allows suffering to test us, or it is for his ultimate pleasure or for our ultimate spiritual growth.
And Singh, because of all his reading, anticipates these exact theological defenses, and he systematically attempts to dismantle them within his essay.
So how does he handle the God's law argument?
So, to the argument that suffering is just God's law, Singh applies a really strict logical test.
Okay.
His counter is that if God is bound by any supreme law, like if he is forced to operate within a set of rules that require human suffering, then he is, by definition, not omnipotent.
Because an all-powerful being cannot be subservient to a law.
Exactly. If there's a rule he can't break, he's not all-powerful.
Okay, so what about the other argument? The one that says God uses suffering to test humanity, or for his own pleasure?
To address that, Singh brings in an analogy that really seeks to expose the cognitive dissonance of that justification.
Oh, this is the gladiator analogy, right?
Yes.
I found his logic here to be quite striking. He asks if God inflicts injury on humans just so he can apply a soothing ointment later.
Right.
And he likens this to the organizers of ancient gladiator bouts. He asks, do you intentionally throw men to half-starved lions, watch them get brutally torn apart just so you can swoop in, rescue them, and care for them if they somehow survive the mauling?
It's a brutal image.
It really is. He's asking, does a benevolent God derive pleasure from creating humans just to watch them endure horrific suffering, only to occasionally throw them a divine lifeline.
Yeah, and Singh's fundamental point with that gladiator analogy is a demand for moral consistency.
Moral consistency, okay.
He is insisting that a deity must be held to at least the same basic moral standard we would hold a human leader to.
That makes sense.
If a human leader intentionally created a system of immense suffering just to occasionally act as a savior, we would classify them as a psychopath. So Singh argues that labeling this exact same behavior as working in mysterious ways, when applied to a deity, it's a failure of logical reasoning.
Okay, so if the Christian or Islamic model of a singular, omnipotent creator who both punishes and rewards falls apart under the problem of evil for him, what about the traditional Hindu model?
Right, which is quite different.
Because the concept of karma attempts to solve this massive philosophical pothole by offering a different explanation.
It does.
It shifts the blame entirely away from the creator and places it squarely on the created.
Yes.
The theory suggests that God isn't being cruel, you are simply paying a cosmic debt for sins you committed in a previous life.
Exactly. That is the classic theodicy of the karma system. It attempts to maintain the fairness of the universe by expanding the timeline of justice across multiple lifetimes.
Right.
However, Singh aggressively attacks this concept too. And what makes his critique here so unique is that he doesn't use theology to do it.
What does he use?
He uses his deep study of law. He pivots straight to the philosophy of jurisprudence to evaluate karma.
Which is where his multidisciplinary studying really shines.
Oh, absolutely.
Because he breaks down the 3 traditional theories of punishment found in jurisprudence.
Right.
And for anyone who hasn't studied legal philosophy, there are 3 primary justifications for a governing body to punish an individual.
Break those down for us.
Okay, so the first is retribution, which is essentially an eye for an eye, state-sanctioned revenge.
Okay.
The second is deterrence. That's punishing someone severely and publicly to scare others away from committing the same crime.
Right, making an example of them.
Exactly. And the third is reformation, which is punishing someone with the specific goal of rehabilitating them, teaching them why their action was wrong, and turning them into a productive, peace-loving citizen.
And Singh points out that modern legal thinkers have almost entirely condemned the retribution theory as barbaric.
Right.
And the deterrence theory is also widely considered flawed by progressive legal minds, which leaves the reformative theory as the only logically and morally accepted justification for punishment in modern human society.
Okay, so having established reformation as the only valid progressive reason to inflict punishment, Singh then subjects godly punishment, specifically the karma theory of reincarnation, to this exact standard.
Yes.
And he paints this brilliantly absurd scenario to test it.
I love this part.
Yeah, he asks the reader to assume, just for the sake of argument, that they committed a grievous crime in a past life.
Right.
And God, in his infinite cosmic wisdom, punishes them by reincarnating them as a donkey.
Or a tree. Or a cat.
Exactly. And Singh asks the pivotal question here. What is the reformative value of that punishment?
Right.
How does reincarnating a human soul into the body of an animal teach them a moral lesson or rehabilitate them into a better human citizen?
It just doesn't. It seems completely untethered from the concept of learning.
Yeah. To use a modern analogy, imagine a judge sentencing a criminal to a maximum security prison for 20 years. But right before the prisoner walks into the cell, the judge uses some sci-fi device to completely erase their memory of ever committing the crime.
Right.
That person is now sitting in a cell, suffering every single day with absolutely zero idea why they are being punished.
Had no context.
None. They cannot reflect on their actions, and they cannot learn from a mistake they don't even remember making.
That analogy perfectly captures the essence of Singh's critique. He actually labels the karma theory's version of justice as, quote, tomfoolery perpetrated in the name of punishment.
Tomfoolery, wow.
Yeah, and he notes with this sharp irony that you never meet a donkey who possesses the awareness that he was once a human who sinned in a past life.
Right, exactly.
The punishment lacks any mechanism for the offender to actually understand their offense.
But, you know, a theologian might push back here.
Sure.
They might argue that karma isn't a justice system built by a human court for rehabilitation, you know. It is a cosmic law of cause and effect, much like gravity. So, is Singh perhaps misapplying human legal theory to a fundamental physical or spiritual law of the universe?
And that is exactly the friction point Singh anticipates.
Okay.
His argument is that if karma is just a blind cosmic law of cause and effect, like gravity, then it cannot be used as a moral justification for suffering.
Ah, I see.
And it certainly shouldn't be governed by a conscious, judging deity. If it is a moral judgment, it must have a moral purpose.
Like reformation.
Exactly. By exposing this contradiction, Singh refuses to let theology hide behind the excuse of cosmic law when that law is actively used to justify human misery.
And he doesn't just leave it at exposing the philosophical absurdity, right?
No, he takes it further.
He takes it a crucial step further to expose the devastating sociological consequence of the karma theory.
This is where it gets really real.
Yeah, he argues that this theology isn't just a harmless, abstract fairy tale. It operates as an active weapon of oppression.
Yes. And this is where Singh the Marxist merges seamlessly with Singh the Atheist. Because he analyzes how the theory of past life sins is primarily weaponized to justify the Indian caste system.
Wow, okay.
According to the mechanics of karma, if a person is born into crushing poverty or into a low caste, it is deemed their own fault.
Right, they brought it on themselves.
Exactly. The religious structure tells them they must have been a terrible sinner in their previous birth, and therefore they inherently deserve their poverty.
They deserve their lack of access to education.
Yes, and they deserve the systemic contempt they receive from the upper castes.
And he brings up a historically brutal example to anchor this point. He references the ancient codified practice where if a person from a low caste accidentally heard the sacred words of the Vedas,
Which was strictly forbidden.
right, completely forbidden. And if they did, the upper caste Brahmins were permitted to pour melted lead into their ears.
Just horrific.
Unbelievable cruelty. And Singh asks a devastating analytical question about this scenario. He says, if that low caste person committed a sin by listening to the sacred text, who bears the cosmic brunt of the sin for the torture of the melted lead,
Right.
is it God who designed the system? Or is it the selfish, proud Brahmins who coined these theological theories specifically to justify their own usurped power?
And his conclusion is totally unambiguous.
Huh.
These theological theories were invented by privileged classes specifically to protect their privilege.
To maintain the status quo.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In his framework, poverty is not a divine punishment. It is a structural systemic failure.
Right.
And by successfully convincing the oppressed classes that their suffering is mandated by the cosmos and that it's their own fault, the oppressors construct a psychological prison.
Yeah.
A prison that ensures the poor never, ever revolt against their earthly masters.
Okay, so if we follow Singh's logic to this point, it leaves a massive vacuum.
It does.
Because he has argued that God doesn't exist, that the problem of evil disproves a benevolent creator, and that religious theories like karma are logically flawed tools of class oppression.
Right. He's torn it all down.
But this raises an obvious anthropological question. If God isn't real, why is religion such a universal phenomenon?
That's the big question.
Like, why does almost every single human society across the globe independently invent a concept of the divine?
And Singh attempts to answer this through a deeply sociological and psychological lens.
Okay.
He looks at the origin of the concept of God as a psychological crutch that developed very early in human history.
Right.
His theory posits that primitive man created God in his own imagination when he first realized his profound weaknesses, limitations, and just general shortcomings in the face of a terrifying, uncontrollable nature.
So it seems he views this invention as serving a dual purpose for early societies.
Right, two main functions.
On one hand, God acts as a necessary deterrent.
Okay, explain that.
Well, before the establishment of complex legal systems, society needed whimsical laws and the omnipresent fear of divine fury just to keep individuals from becoming a constant danger to one another.
Right, like an invisible police force.
Exactly. And on the other hand, God acts as a massive comfort blanket.
Oh.
In times of extreme distress, when a person is utterly helpless against disease or natural disaster, God is imagined as a powerful father or mother figure who can theoretically intervene and help.
Yeah, and Singh concedes that the idea of God is undeniably helpful to a human being in distress.
It provides solace.
It does. But the fatal flaw, according to his analysis, is the unholy alliance that inevitably forms between religious structures and earthly power.
Right.
He's very fond of quoting the American writer Upton Sinclair, specifically from a pamphlet called Prophets of Religion.
Oh, what's the quote?
The quote Singh highlights is, "Make a man a firm believer in the immortality of the soul, then rob him of all that he possesses. He will willingly help you in the process."
Wow. That is a chilling observation regarding the utility of faith for an oppressor.
It really is.
And Singh argues that History proves this true across different cultures and eras. All faiths, all religious creeds eventually become institutionalized supporters of tyrannical institutions and exploiting classes.
Almost without exception.
Eventually, a legitimate material rebellion against an earthly king or a capitalist is twisted by the priesthood to be framed as a sin against God himself.
And we see Singh actively applying this theoretical critique to the immediate modern debates of his time.
Right, what was happening around him?
Specifically, the communalism that was just ravaging India in the 1920s.
Oh, yeah.
Because he observed firsthand how the British colonial administration utilized a divide-and-rule policy.
A very famous strategy.
Yeah, they were actively weaponizing religious differences to create communal frenzy and riots between Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs.
So how exactly did he view these communal clashes through his Marxist lens?
He viewed them as a tragic distraction from the real material struggle.
Distraction, okay.
He noted with just deep frustration that in India, impoverished people were breaking each other's heads in the name of protecting sacred animals or defending paper idols,
Right.
while entirely ignoring the economic exploitation and the blood of their fellow humans.
Wow.
They were fighting over theology while being collectively robbed by imperialism.
And this realization led to his stance of absolute uncompromising secularism in the public sphere.
Yes.
And he proved he was willing to suffer major political consequences for this stance. The sources note he even parted ways politically with his own mentor, Lala Lajpat Rai.
Yeah, which was huge. Rai was an absolute giant of the Indian independence movement.
But when Rai's politics began to take on a communal religious color, Singh split from him.
He had to.
Singh forcefully argued that the revolutionary youth must completely drop their religious identities in their political lives and see themselves first and foremost as human beings,
Right.
and then as Indians united against a common economic enemy.
And his commitment to breaking down these religiously justified barriers extended fiercely into his fight against untouchability.
Yeah, he was very vocal about that.
He wrote this heavy-hearted, incredibly impassioned article titled Achut Ka Sawal, which translates to The Question of Untouchability.
Okay.
In it, he asked how Indians could demand freedom from the British while simultaneously worshiping animals but refusing to sit with fellow human beings.
That's a powerful contradiction to point out.
He called upon the youth to completely rebel against this hierarchical social setup.
You know, there is an incredibly poignant, deeply moving anecdote in Junaid's biography that proves he didn't just write about these concepts.
Yeah, he actually lived them.
He lived them up to his final breath. Just before his execution, he had a very specific request for his last meal.
He did. So, in a society rigidly divided by caste purity laws, he requested that his last meal be prepared by a Dalit employee of the Lahore Central Jail,
Right.
a sweeper named Boga. And the lower castes, especially sweepers, were considered completely untouchable by orthodox upper castes, and eating food prepared by them was a severe social taboo.
Right, you just didn't do it.
But Singh, he used to call Boga Bebe, which is a term of endearment that means mother.
Wow.
And when asked to explain this, Singh said, "A mother cleans the filth of her children, and you too clear the filth of the jail. Therefore, it is appropriate to call you Bebe."
That anecdote is just staggering. To regard an untouchable sweeper as his own mother and to request food from his hands in his final moments, it really demonstrates how deeply he had internalized this radical equality.
Exactly.
It wasn't just abstract philosophy or political posturing for him. It was a lived reality that he maintained even at the very threshold of death.
Which brings us to a critical juncture in our exploration of his philosophy.
Okay, where to?
Well, if you successfully convince a population that their divine safety net is actually a tool of their oppression, and you tear down the ancient social order, you leave an immense psychological and societal vacuum.
Right, and nature abhors a vacuum.
Exactly. So what exactly did Singh intend to fill it with?
For Singh, the new foundation was what we can call the realist alternative, science and revolution.
Right.
In his essay, he addresses the inevitable fundamental question that religious believers throw at atheists, which is, if there is no God, how do you explain the origin of the world and mankind?
And his answer reflects his voracious reading in that jail cell.
Yep.
He points directly to biological science, specifically Charles Darwin's Origin of Species.
Wow, okay.
He argues that human progress and the state of the world depend entirely on man's constant conflict with nature, and his collective efforts to utilize nature for his own benefit.
Right.
It does not depend on pleasing a conscious, hidden power behind the scenes.
He also applies this biological realism to the highly sensitive question of suffering that clearly isn't caused by human society.
Right, the natural suffering.
For instance, if a child is born blind or with a severe congenital disability, and it is not a punishment for a past life sin, why does it happen?
It's a tough question for theology.
But Singh simply states it is a biological phenomenon, a result of biology, not theology.
And by doing this, he completely removes the moral judgment from physical ailments.
That's huge.
A disability is no longer a cosmic stain on a person's soul. It is a random biological occurrence that society must manage with compassion and science, not with religious judgment.
This scientific realist approach fundamentally shifted his definition of what revolution actually meant, too.
Yeah, it evolved significantly.
We discussed earlier how he moved away from the romantic idea of revolution. So for students trying to grasp his political theory, how did his definition of revolution evolve?
Well, it is vital to understand that revolution, to the mature Singh, was no longer just the cult of the pistol and bomb.
Right.
Violence was merely a tactical phase, a highly specific tool that might have to be used, but it was absolutely not the end goal. The true definition of revolution, in his Marxist framework, was the ultimate establishment of an order where the sovereignty of the proletariat, the working class, is recognized and enforced.
He believed that society, much like biological organisms in Darwin's theory, must evolve.
Yes.
And to evolve, it must violently throw off the dead weight of obsolete traditions and oppressive economic structures.
Right.
He argued that state suppression cannot stop this evolutionary force, and he used historical examples to prove this inevitability. He pointed out that the mighty Bastille couldn't prevent the French Revolution.
Yeah.
And the freezing exiles in Siberia couldn't liquidate the Russian Revolution. Revolution is presented as a natural law of societal progress.
Because of this deep Marxist socialist lens, the actual locus of the fight shifted dramatically in his mind.
Where did it shift to?
The real revolutionary armies weren't just a handful of young men with guns hiding in urban centers anymore.
Right.
The true power, he wrote, resided in the villages and the factories, with the peasantry and the industrial laborers. And crucially, he realized the fight wasn't just against the British colonial masters.
And this is a major insight that alienated some of the more traditional nationalists.
Definitely.
Because he wrote that it matters very little to a starving peasant whether their exploiters are purely British capitalists or British and Indians working in alliance, or even purely Indian capitalists.
Right. Exploitation is exploitation.
Exactly. If the economic exploitation of the common people continues, the revolutionary struggle must continue. He was fighting for structural liberation from class exploitation, regardless of the skin color or nationality of the exploiter.
It is an incredibly sophisticated, holistic political vision for a 23-year-old operating in the 1920s.
It really is.
But it is important to remember that philosophy is relatively easy when you are sitting in a library or a university classroom.
Sure.
It is easy to champion stark realism and atheism when you are comfortable and safe. The ultimate validation of Singh's philosophy came when he had to test his realist, atheist worldview in the absolute ultimate crucible.
Right, in the face of imminent, certain, state-sanctioned death.
Exactly.
Which brings us to Section 7 of our deep dive, focusing on the ultimate test of conviction.
Yeah.
And he recognized the psychological difficulty of his position. He actually admits in his writings that having a belief in God can give a poetic turn to suffering.
It provides a massive psychological consolation.
Right.
If you believe in God, you can tell yourself that your execution is a divine test, or that you will be richly rewarded in paradise as a martyr, or reborn as a king in the next life.
Yeah, it gives it meaning.
Religion offers a safety net for the mind facing the abyss.
But atheism...
Atheism, by contrast, strips all that comforting architecture away.
Yeah.
It leaves a man, as Singh wrote, to stand entirely on his own 2 feet amidst storms and hurricanes, facing the absolute finality of his own end.
And the colonial authorities actually attempted to exploit this exact psychological vulnerability.
They did.
In 1927, when he was in police custody facing serious charges that could lead to the gallows, some police officials repeatedly tried to persuade him to offer prayers to God.
Yeah, and the likely psychological strategy there was to break his resolve.
Right.
To find a crack in his ideological armor.
Exactly.
If the defiant atheist revolutionary could be seen praying out of fear It would undermine his entire intellectual platform.
But Singh completely refused.
Yeah.
He realized that if he only bragged about being an atheist in days of peace, but then turned to God in hard times out of sheer terror of death, it would be a total degradation of his character and a betrayal of his studies.
Right.
He wrote, "For selfish motives, I am not going to pray." He realized he didn't want the help of any intoxication, what Marx called the opiate of the masses, to meet his fate.
And the level of sheer moral fortitude required to maintain that stance, it is difficult to even comprehend.
It really is.
He was facing what he explicitly recognized in his philosophy as utter annihilation.
Utter annihilation.
As an atheist, he firmly believed his consciousness would simply cease to exist.
No afterlife.
No heavenly reward waiting for him. And yet, he devoted his short life and ultimately sacrificed it, purely for the sake of liberating humanity from material suffering and distress.
Knowing he would never personally see the results.
Exactly.
He wanted to meet his end, in his own words, with the head high and erect to the last.
And he did.
Historical accounts confirm he did exactly that. On March 23, 1931, at the age of 23, Bhagat Singh and his comrades were executed by the British state.
If we synthesize the logical progression of what we've unpacked today, it represents a staggering intellectual journey.
It really does.
We have traced how a young romantic, initially driven by pure emotional passion, morphed into a voracious, deeply analytical reader.
Right?
We saw him logically evaluate and critique the concept of a benevolent deity by rigorously applying jurisprudence and the philosophical problem of evil. And finally, we saw him champion a secular, socialist reality designed specifically to fight economic and social exploitation at its very root, maintaining his secular convictions right up to the gallows.
So what does this all mean for you, listening right now?
That's the real question.
Because we aren't fighting the British Empire in the 1920s anymore, but we are living in an era of massive information overload.
Oh, yeah.
Of impenetrable ideological echo chambers, where it is incredibly easy to simply accept the prevailing dogma of whatever political or social group we happen to belong to.
Exactly.
Bhagat Singh's absolute demand for merciless criticism and independent thinking, his insistence on aggressively tearing down his own beliefs to see if they actually hold up to the harsh light of reason, that methodology is incredibly urgently relevant today.
It is the absolute essence of critical thinking. His writings challenge us to not merely inherit our worldview from our parents, our mentors, or our culture,
right,
but to actively construct it, rigorously test it against logic, and possess the intellectual courage to abandon it if reason demands it.
Which brings me to a final provocative thought for you to mull over as we wrap up this deep dive.
Okay, let's hear it.
So Bhagat Singh argued that mankind originally invented the concept of God out of a feeling of profound weakness, right? A desperate need for an imaginary protector to help us face the terrifying complexities of nature and society.
Right, an omniscient system to offload our anxieties onto.
Exactly. Well, today, as we face a world of unprecedented complexity, we are increasingly surrendering our decision-making, our creativity, and our fundamental trust to omniscient, invisible algorithms and artificial intelligence.
Wow.
We ask the machine for answers. We trust its mysterious, opaque processes to guide our finances, our media, and our lives.
That's true.
So are we, in our modern state of weakness and overwhelm, simply inventing a brand new, inescapable deity to compensate for our cognitive limitations?
That is a deep question.
Are we actively building the very psychological crutch that Bhagat Singh warned us about?
That is a deeply unsettling yet fascinating parallel to consider regarding human nature's constant search for an all-knowing authority.
Just remember, a broken bone on an X-ray is clean and binary, but the landscape of human belief, theology, and societal structures is deeply, deeply murky.
Very true.
It requires relentless study and merciless criticism to navigate. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. Keep questioning the world around you, keep pulling at the threads of your own beliefs, and we will catch you on the next one.